Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am excited to introduce Alyssa Wilmot, who is the director of the Movement Factory, a college professor, assistant to Melissa Fenley Dance, and a choreographer in her company Group A. And we wanted to talk a little bit about her experience as a choreographer, as someone that teaches Pilates, and that has worked with various age groups about integrating dance into the classroom. We've been talking for the past 2 weeks. This is the second week of us talking about movement and how movement can be helpful as a mode of learning, and how you can use movement just like we used music and visual art as a medium to allow for not only self expression and social emotional teaching, but also can address a host of issues, whether it's spatial awareness or learning different subjects like math, science, reading, etc. So I thought we'd continue this conversation. Um, I was also thinking of, some different ways that you could approach this second share that you're going to do this week, which is to create a second lesson plan based around movement. And then Alyssa has some insight on the California learning standards, and she's going to talk a little bit about that and also Pilates. So hello, and thanks
Hi.
for joining us.
Hi, everybody. Nice to virtually meet you. Hi, George. Thanks for inviting me. So
So
I'm
I
I'm here in my home studio. So since COVID, I had a dance studio and a Pilates studio that I was the owner and operator of, and I closed them down and I moved to a virtual format. So this is where I teach now. So this is my Pilates and dance room that you're seeing here.
it's interesting to think about, especially because a lot of these teachers are working in small classrooms and you're having to now teach in a smaller space, and a lot of your clients, I'm sure, are in small spaces as well. What has been the challenges for you of working in a small space, and what's some, tips you might have about that?
So I have two, that's a really good question. I have two dance clients who actually have dance studios in their own homes. So they have
Wow.
like full studios in their home with like a mirror and ballet bars and everything. So those clients that I work with, I'm more limited just in my space and they're not limited. So that's been kind of interesting just to like, I kind of am like jealous while I'm teaching them. Like, I want to be there. I want to be doing that. And I also teach Pilates. And so some of my clients also have Pilates equipment at home. So they have reformers, chairs. They have all the actual like apparatus and the boards. A lot of them bought it from me when I sold my studio. Some of them bought newer things from online. So I have clients who have kind of incorporated their own homes into like studios, which is kind of cool that that's happened like with the pandemic, where they were like, I'm so into this, I'm so dedicated to this, like I'm going for it, and I'm just gonna like never leave my house and just make it work for me. So, but my clients who don't have those things, they all have like the ball and the stuff that we need for Pilates. But in terms of trying to teach in a small space, it is hard when it comes to movement. So the course that I was teaching for the college, everybody was at home. The floor is hard when you're teaching dance. Like my students were trying to turn. I'm like, okay, well, we're just not going to do pirouettes. Pirouette is like a ballet spin. Like people are like getting like burns on their feet and falling and like I'm like, okay, we're just not going to learn. We're taking that off the syllabus. So you have to be flexible, literally, like when you're working with movement with people, I think, like no pun intended, but because it like you don't anything can happen and people can fall down, hurt themselves. You have to try to figure out like you're like reach up and then like people end up like hitting things. And so yeah, you have to take the space into consideration for sure with your lesson plan. So you just what I've learned too with doing movement with people is like you have an idea and it's just like working with kids in general, right? Like you have this sort of idea and then like all these things happen. So you just have to make it work for you. So it's like, okay, if it's a really small space, all right, guess what? We're going to explore small range movements. Let's do near reach movements. Everybody show me in movements what you did today before you came to school. Go. No talking, and everybody's like doing these kinds of things, and so, okay, we're gonna like explore near reach movements. What kind of people do near reach movements? Pedestrian movement. Who does pedestrian movement? Postmodern dance. And then you can like, you know what I mean? You can just like improvise while you're teaching if you have to, if it's like super small space.
Yeah.
So yeah, so a challenge for me has just been also just trying to communicate over the camera, but I haven't had too much problems with space doing this because most of my people have like amazing setups that they're doing, but it is something to consider in general as a dance
Yeah.
teacher.
When you're, when you've done work with, with different teachers and, you've taught teachers before and, you working with like pedestrian movement and telling stories. I know I've seen you do that before. Like, what's your sort of process for that? And, what are maybe some suggestions you have if you want to tell a story through pedestrian movement?
Yeah, that's great. So one thing that I like to do, that I usually teach, like if I'm teaching teachers, actually George came to one of my classes. So I used to live in California and I taught at the National Hispanic University, and George came and was a guest lecturer in my class, right? Like so many years ago. And we were teaching teachers how this exact same course, right? Like how do you incorporate dance into the classroom? So one of the things that I like to do to kind of like prepare for trying to tell a story, or like how do we learn pedestrian movement, or how can we teach our students to do pedestrian movement, is to look at like the Laban. I don't know if you guys have talked about Laban at all, but like some
No.
ideas that Rudolf von Laban had about his qualities of movement. So I love, that's like a really good thing that you can introduce to your classroom, is looking at qualities of movement. Like Laban was a movement theorist in Vienna, and then he was, I think, in Germany and London, and he now has the Laban Institute. Of course, he's long gone, but he created Laban notation, so he created dance notation. So sometimes I like to introduce all that by looking at Laban's ideas. So I look at like the different qualities of movement. Like he says, there's swinging. All movement can be swinging. It can be percussive, like it can make a sound. It can be vibratory, which is like percussive on repeat. It can be sustained. It can be suspended. Okay, so he has like, there's different qualities of movement, and then there's different efforts. So the efforts, there's different actions and qualities. It's kind of complicated, but you can kind of like pick and choose from it. And that's always a really good topic. So sometimes, like if I'm going to be doing something about pedestrian movement, or like let's learn how to tell stories, one thing that makes dance look so interesting is the dynamic changes. So
Mm-hmm.
Laban was analyzing people's movements, like truck drivers and teachers and kids and adults and animals. And he was saying like, okay, all human movement can be put into these different categories. And then those categories he broke down, and he talked about a kinesphere, which is like the space that's around us. So he was a really interesting movement theorist. And so when we're trying to make movement, we can break it down. Like we're seeing this every time we see movement, every time we watch dance, we're seeing these things, but he kind of put a name to it. You know what I mean? He was like, okay, so that's vibratory movement. It's in a low level. It's with like a strong action. Okay. And so that's a fun thing that you can do with all ages. I even do that with my college students, like where we'll look at the different effort actions and we'll look at the different qualities, and then we try to put things together. So usually if I'm having students do something like tell a story, or let's do pedestrian movement, I that first, so then they can try to add some of those qualitative changes, and they can kind of add like the different levels, and they can, so we sort of talk about like the different elements of dance first before I would just like go into that.
Right.
But I love, I'm sure you guys have talked about the elements of dance, but like I love talking about the elements of dance. You can talk about it all semester: space, time, and force, like any of those categories. And then you can look at Laban's ideas and kind of put those in, and like you have lesson plans for the rest of your life. Thank you, Rudolf von Laban, for helping us as dance educators.
And you're sort of getting a new vocabulary too. There's a lot of words that you can introduce.
Yeah, that's another thing is like, how do we talk about dance? So I feel like also because of social media and like everything is so quick, 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 and everybody's like liking things, And so this whole idea of aesthetic valuing, I think, is really important to bring into the classroom. I'm kind of like going off subject here, but it gives people term. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it gives people vocabulary to explain why they like something or maybe what they're seeing. You know what I mean? Instead of just like, you can say to your students, like, here's this dance. And then you'll say like, what do you think? And they say like, I like it. And it's like, okay, like put the heart on Facebook or the thumbs up. Like, who cares, right? Like, who
Right.
cares if you like it or not? But we're in this like community of likes,
Right.
especially like these middle school, high schoolers, like they want as many likes, but it's like, why do you like it? And so that's what like we're trying to give them a language so they can do aesthetic valuing where they can like explain, I like it because blah, 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 blah. Or like, how can you describe the movement? And it's not just like a quick comment that you're texting somebody.
And a lot of that is having open-ended questions when you're asking these students
Mhm.
about that as well. So you're not just shutting it down by saying, "Do you like this dance?"
Right. Yeah. So, like, who cares if you like it or not, really?
Right.
But it's like, why do you like it? And how do we contextualize it within dance history? And like, how do we contextualize it within human movement or another subject?
And just getting
So,
out of the like at all, when asking, like,
mhm,
asking about the movement quality of the piece or asking about the story of the piece instead of
mhm,
asking them to whether they're
mhm.
5 or 15, you know,
Right.
do they like this?
Right. But I mean, I do think it's important for people to be able, especially like school age children, to be able to make judgments about dance and to make judgments about art so that they can develop, I mean, they can like have their own personal voice as an artist or as, as a person. But yeah, I think like one thing we get stuck on is like, do you like it? Yes or no? And then like that's yes, and then it's done, or no, and then it's done. But it's like there's more to it. And that's like where I think as like educators, we need to like go into that space. But yeah, we have to have language to talk about it. And dance is this temporal art. Like you guys have probably talked about this, even music too, but like music is just, dance is just so bizarre because you like see it and it's gone. You know what I mean? And like you're trying to process all these things and it's hard for people. Like so many people just walk away and they're like, I don't get it. Right.
It's
So
ephemeral.
yeah, exactly. And so like we need to help people get it, even if not getting it is what they're supposed to get, like that's okay. So I think part of aesthetic valuing is giving people the confidence that they could watch a dance, they could go to a dance performance, and they could make judgments or look at the qualities or look at the history or like connect it to another subject, something so they don't walk away going, I didn't get it. I hate dance. Or like, I didn't get it. That was weird. Right. Like,
Right.
right. So we need to try to like give people like a way to talk about dance, I guess. So sometimes I like looking at Laban. It's Laban. I like looking at a lot of his concepts to help come up with some ways to talk about dance. So like it's very clear for people to like categorize things.
It's also, I think, important because he came up with a notation as
Hmm.
well. He came up with a style of notation
Yeah.
called
So
Laban
it's really,
notation.
yeah, Laban notation. It's really complicated and it's really cumbersome, I think, but it's interesting. And that's always a really fun thing that you can do with your students too, is to have somebody create some kind of movement and then have everybody try to like either draw it or write it. And then notice, like, go around the classroom and see how many different variations of the same thing you have. And then that's like a good way you could talk about notation and you can connect that to music. And you could even connect that to like the tape, like the periodic table of elements or something. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's so many different like routes you could go with even that concept.
Or literacy awareness and approaching different types of print, by creating these kind of hieroglyphic,
Mhm.
shapes,
Yeah. Yeah.
different
Or
modes of
even,
communication.
right, exactly. Or language, or yeah, there's so many things. Or, even just in the terms of like, I like it, I don't like it. You could work on compare and contrast papers in English with that. like comparing two dances on TikTok or something that that they're watching. Like, I mean, there's so many routes you can go.
Right.
And I think too with dance, like one thing I've noticed is the more, because I teach a lot of students who like just came out of high school or still in high school at the community college level, and they're so excited to just like learn about where these things that they're seeing on TikTok come from, but they're also excited to like talk about the things that they like right now and to like do presentations on it. So you, as I'm sure you all know, as educators, to do something that like people find current or that they're really into.
Right.
So yeah, I'm big on Laban and I'm big on aesthetic valuing. So that's how I would approach like trying to get people to even create movement phrases. But on the flip side, if you just wanted to go straight with just doing pedestrian movement, it's a good segue to get people to move because we move all the time. So that's kind of what I always tell people is like, we're all dancers. Like you don't have to be Sarah Mearns in the New York City Ballet, like the principal ballerina, or Misty Copeland to be a dancer. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
being a dancer has a lot of different meanings. Like you
You
can be 80 years old and be doing like ballroom dance on a Saturday night at the local like Fred Astaire studio, and you're still a dancer. You know what I mean? Like we're all dancers in my mind because we all move, and
yeah.
dancing is movement.
It's just framing that movement. That's something I think that like we even when teachers are intimidated to dance, it's because
Mhm.
they think they need to look a certain way in order to show movement.
Yeah.
And that's something like, to really remind yourself when teaching, that's not the point here. The point isn't to wow these students with your technique.
You don't need to like kick your leg over your head and do this like triple turn and land in the splits.
Right.
It's not necessary. And one thing I would say too to that is like if you're concerned about your technique, I mean, you can also get the class moving. There's so many YouTube videos of like even like, like Hairspray the musical. There's like a choreographer. You know what I mean? Like there's like YouTube has so many resources you could show your class, or you could learn yourself off of YouTube something, or like you could do something really basic like a line dance. People love line dances, so that's, and like there's tutorials online. There's like the Cupid Shuffle, there's the why can't I think of it? The Get Up, which is like that newer one. There's
Yeah.
the electric slide. There's so many line dances, and like kids of all ages and
They
grown-ups
love
love
it.
line dances.
Yeah.
And that's a really good way to teach about direction.
Yeah.
It's a good way to talk about level, space. And you can be like, what did we learn in this line dance? You can look at all sorts of different things. You can even take it the route of like line dances come from African dance. They come from disco. There's so many like things you can teach with a line dance.
Yeah. Folk dance.
Yeah. So, you don't have to do this extreme dance. Like Latin dances are really easy to teach. Like a salsa or a cha-cha, like you can learn those really easily and teach that kind of thing. So it's interesting too, because I teach adults who, I'm teaching at the college level. And one of the first things I always ask them is like, tell me some of your dance experiences. And almost all of them will say they like did something with dance in school. And they always remember that. Like they always remember like oh
Yeah.
yeah, one time in fourth grade, we did square dancing in gym class. Like think of all the things they did in fourth grade. And like
Right.
they remember that.
It goes to show you how that kinesthetic learning is really undervalued and underplayed in general, that when we do get that kind of movement learning, that it really stays with us.
Yeah, it really, really, really does. And I think, because of funding, a lot of places like cut the dance, like some schools have dedicated dance classes, a lot don't. Like I never went to a school that had it. I don't even know if we did it in class. I mean, I went to a private studio, but that's why I love the California standards for the arts. So I don't know if other states have standards for the arts, but I just know California standards for the arts because I was teaching in California and I was required to learn it and I was required to teach it. So as a dance educator, you can download for free the California Standards for the Arts, and it goes over, it's pre-kindergarten through grade 12, visual performing arts content standards for California public schools. And everybody go and Google this right now. If you go to Arts Council artscouncilsc.org. Okay. And I'll send it to George and maybe he can like post it on
Mhm.
your class board. But it's absolutely an amazing resource. You can look at this and get ideas. They talk about artistic perception, creative expression, historical and cultural context, aesthetic valuing, and then connections, relationships, and applications. And they basically give you lesson plans for all of those. Don't use this for your assignment for George. Let's do this do this week. He will know. This is for after the class is over.
Well, it can help inform. And that,
Yeah,
I think it's great
inform you.
because,
Exactly.
the California standards they're just a little bit more, their language and the ideas are a little bit more advanced than the Pennsylvania standards, that the art standards. So
Mhm.
I just think it's interesting to go beyond the tri-state area, and look at, the California standards, just as, further ideas, even if those standards obviously don't apply, learning standards don't apply to their classrooms, it still can be really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. So I really love those, and I think that it's extremely useful when making lesson plans, or even just to kind of go over it and be familiar with some of the ideas, so that it informs even some questions that you're asking in the classroom with other activities that you're doing. And just to keep yourself open to that, like at any point you can add kinesthetic learning.
Yeah.
I mean, at any point, like, if you're like, let's say, even if you're a history teacher and you're talking about something, you could add dance into that at any point. And a lot of my students have said, like, I don't understand why I didn't learn this in middle school. I don't understand why I didn't learn this in high school.
Yeah. We're not, hopefully it's getting better, but, the way that the system is set up is for students to sit in desks, you know, throughout the day. And, this kind of kinesthetic way of learning isn't always valued. We're taught, to kind of go to a single place and sit down for 8 hours and get up for lunch and get up for here, just like many people do in the real world. But, if we can kind of offer these opportunities for a more diverse learning pathway, that learning style, that it can be really beneficial to our students.
It's true. And also, like, even just for mental health and physical health, which I'm sure you've talked about, but I really like Tony Robbins, and Tony Robbins has this thing where he says, like, if you kind of feel stuck, or you're like in a bad mood, he says, like, change your physiology, or if like you're feeling depressed. So he has this thing where you like stand up and you do arm circles. I'm going to move back here. And you go like with your thumbs up and you do this for a minute, and then you reverse it for a minute, and then you do jumping jacks for a minute, or however long you want. And he's like, I guarantee, like, after you do that, you're going to feel different. And it's really true. I mean, try it. So it's like, if your students are like falling asleep in the class, I always think of, when I was in high school, they'd like send you to the detention. So then you like, sleep more. Like, what if you
Yeah.
just have everybody get up and do a line dance, or just do that, like thumbs up circles, and yeah, the high schoolers are going to feel like, oh, do I look stupid? Is my friend looking at me? But,
Right.
I mean, there's like simple movement things you can do, or incorporate Pilates exercises or yoga into your classroom, which I know, might be controversial because you have so many things you have to accomplish. But in the end, if you can carve that time out, you're also teaching them ways to like kinesthetically change their physiology, to like basically be able to handle or accomplish things more.
Well, and I think too, when you were mentioning line dancing and other things like that that are more set, that I've always had the experience that if I start with something like that, then they start to get comfortable. So then, if they are going to choreograph something themselves, or we're going to do something that's more free form, they've already been in the practice of moving, and they've been comfortable moving with each other for a few minutes. That
Mhm.
that shyness starts to go away, and they feel a little bit more confident. And you, as a instructor, feel a little bit more confident because you've been doing this thing together with them in unison and feeling that connection between the other people in the room, that then maybe you feel a little bit more comfortable to express yourself individually and have your individual voice heard.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I mean, be prepared too. Like when you do things, like some people are going to start laughing,
Mm-hmm.
You know, some of the kids are going to laugh. Some of the kids are going to get really out of control. Like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you give them a little bit of movement, especially the younger kids, they get like they can't control themselves. Some of the kids will be really shy. Some of the kids will love it. Like they will be like, you know, and they're used to dancing at home or they're, you know, so it's just be ready for anything. And, you know, you just have to like stay committed to what you're doing because, you know, people are going to handle it differently.
And I think organizing the space in a way, particularly with the younger kids, where they
Mm-hmm.
don't have room to, run off somewhere, that, there
Mm-hmm.
isn't other things in the room that can distract them.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a dance teacher, I always made sure there was nothing else that they could play with while, they were dancing, or they couldn't go off into a corner, or that they couldn't get too wild because I controlled the space physically, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah,
And
and also sometimes like what, especially with younger kids, if you have them move their bodies, it's really hard for them not to yell and say things. Like if, you know, even doing simple like animal exploration stuff, like, okay, everybody like move like a turtle, everybody move like a dog, everybody move like a tiger. I mean, they're gonna make the noises,
mm-hmm.
but which is fine, I think, if you're doing like theater. But if you really want to just stick it to dance, you have to be like, no talking, you know, we have to stay quiet. So yeah, I think like outlining rules is good. But
Mm-hmm.
for older kids, you know, especially sometimes people will feel kind of embarrassed moving their bodies. But I
Mm-hmm.
think it's really important to incorporate moving your body. Like we're not just these heads, you know, just like
Mm-hmm.
floating around, although society makes us feel like that we're hands and heads because all this technology. So especially I feel like now more than ever, we need to get people moving inside their bodies, like with the whole body.
And kind of getting them out of the habit of thinking that movement is performance, you know?
I think it's important, yeah, to make them realize like we are all dancers, we can all move. The body isn't necessarily like something that's only, you know, we're not only moving at certain times, or we're not like, especially like older kids sometimes will feel like something like the body is like really sexual or something, you know, like if you try to like do something, you know, they're like start laughing, like, oh my
Mm-hmm.
gosh, you know, it's just like
Mm-hmm.
you're moving your, you know, you can't do that, you know. So it depends on like a lot of factors, but I think just to give people also like a little bit of ownership over their body too,
Yeah.
you know, that like, you know, this is your body and you're in charge of it and you can move it and you can do things. And it, yeah, it doesn't, you don't have to be on stage at Lincoln Center.
Right.
Like you can be dancing and it's okay. And
Nor
you
do
can,
you have to put them on the spot. I think that,
yeah.
especially with older students, not making them feel like everyone's staring at one person when they're moving, that it doesn't turn into that. I think the more you have people moving at the same time, even if they're doing things
Mhm,
individually, and not having them, be an
mhm.
performative audience, then they're going to be more comfortable, at least in the beginning.
Yeah. And one thing I've done with older kids too is like put them into groups and had them make up, like, let's say, like, there's a song that I hear the kids are listening to and they really like it. I'm like, why don't we make up some choreography to this?
Mm-hmm.
And each group counts and then they get to teach it to each other. So then it's like they have a collective dance or something. That's always really fun. And I've even come into the classroom like a week later and they're all practicing it together. So that's a fun thing for that, like for older kids that are afraid to kind of be like singled out because then they feel like they have a friend or a group of three. And I've done things too where you're in a circle and you kind of pass the I used to call it pass the move. So like one person would do something and everybody follows, and then they'd like go to the person next to them, and then that person would do something. That you have to play with because one guy like ran out crying. He was like a college student. I was like, oh no, I had to go find him in the hallway. He had like a total panic attack. I felt so bad because somebody passed the move to him and he was like his face was just like pure terror. And I was like, oh no, it's supposed to be fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the
Yeah.
thing too, is I think like making movement fun, you
Absolutely.
know, that like it's fun. You don't have to be this professional. You don't have to be like, not everybody's going to judge you. We're all in this together, you know. And then you're going to have different levels too. Like in some of your classrooms, you might have a couple of people who like study at a dance studio and they
Right.
can do like really good things. And, you know, they can be your helper, or they can, you know, you can you're all teachers, so you can figure out what to do. But just kind of be ready for anything. But I think if you show that you don't know what you're doing or you're not sure what you're doing, like as usual as a teacher, then it'll shine through. So that's why it's really important for you to know, okay, I can do this. I can incorporate dance. I might not be a professional dancer, but that's okay. I can still incorporate movement. If you don't feel comfortable with the dance, try a line dance, something really basic. Or, do all these other ideas that are in that California Standards for the Arts or the other things that you guys have been talking about all semester. Or you could go toward yoga, or you could go toward Pilates. You could do some kind of movement modality that at least it's like you're getting them moving.
So I wanted to ask you before we go a little bit about Pilates. Can you explain a little bit about what the principles of Pilates are, sort of the origins of
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. So Pilates is a method of exercise that was created by a man named Joseph Pilates, who is German. And then he brought the system to America, to New York in the early 1900s. And he created different apparatus like a chair and a reformer. It looks like a moving bed. You might have seen them before. You can just Google Pilates right now. Balanced Body is the name of a company that is really good, gives a lot of information about Pilates and sells Pilates equipment. But you can also just do it with yourself and the floor and the air. You don't need to have anything. And it's an idea that your whole system is balanced. When he first started his method, it was called contrology. So it was the idea that you can control your body and we're not just on like automatic pilot. And we're not just a head and hands, like we're an entire system that's balanced. So we're working on alignment and we're working on balance. The number one principle of the breath. So Joseph Pilates did study a lot of yoga and he studied a lot of martial arts. So you see those kind of connected into the method. But in order to teach it, you need to be certified. Plenty of people teach it not being certified, but you can do Pilates-based movement. And kids do enjoy Pilates. I've taught Pilates for kids classes at Ali Herman Pilates in Oakland when it was out there and in her Oakland studio. And I just kind of created the curriculum based off of things like there's some exercises called rolling like a ball and you get into a ball and you roll back and up, things like in a general public school classroom, right? Like you need to have a mat maybe, but there are things you can do standing that you don't need a mat for and you don't need to roll on the floor for. So Pilates is great for kids. And it's also an idea that like you're kind of working your core so that all movement originates from the center of your body. So a lot of dancers like Pilates because it helps with injuries, it helps with rehabilitation. So I do like incorporating Pilates with kids into the classroom, like planks, you do in Pilates, different arm exercises you do in Pilates, things like that, where one part of your body's moving and one part is staying still to work that strength.
Just like awareness of the body and the different parts of the body and all of
Yeah.
the principles of movement.
Yeah. So I'm a big advocate of Pilates. I think everyone should be doing Pilates. You can use the ball. I mean, there's like all sorts of things that you can do with it, but it is something that you could for sure incorporate into a classroom.
Well, thank you, Alyssa, for talking to
Yes.
us today.
I hope
It
it
was
was
really
informative.
helpful. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. And I think you really like I don't know, like to me, like the thesis statement of this whole entire thing is really like when you said it doesn't have to be a performance. And you don't have to be this like even as an educator or as a student, you don't have to be this like amazing dancer to teach dance or to teach movement.
Right. And it's like you were saying earlier, like dance itself, the performance of it is really temporary. And that's, even like we've choreographed together or you choreographing, the best moments are those moments of, remembering something that happened in the moment as opposed to watching it on videotape because dance is in the immediate. You never get that kind of satisfaction moving or dancing than you do watching a videotape of somebody else's performance.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And if you look at like throughout time, the reasons why people dance, it's always the same. And a lot of it is for personal expression. Like it's a way to communicate feelings. It's also a way to celebrate community, ritual. I mean, there's so many reasons for dance, but they're always the same throughout time. You know, they might like change a little bit for each culture. But I mean, I think one of the main things is dance can bring a lot of joy to people. And, you know, it can also make somebody have a panic attack, right? Like I said, but the idea is like in general, it's going to bring people a lot of joy. And,
Right.
you know, the more we can bring joy into our classrooms, I think the better. But
And when you
hands-on learning is the best.
absolutely. And when you look at like those old folk dances, they're not individuals performing, and that's something I think to remember, if you're going around stopping one on a time in a circle, not only are you taking a bunch of time away from your class and kids start getting bored, having to sit through 25 people do something. But then you get these moments of anxiety. I don't know if you've ever had this experience. I get anxiety sometimes if I'm in a large meeting and I have to introduce myself in a circle, that like the longer it is to get to me, the less I remember about who I am, what my name is. Like I couldn't even say
That's
like,
when you do a dance.
and that's when you do a dance. Exactly.
No, but
So
it's true. But yeah, I mean, hopefully this was helpful to you guys and that you got some ideas. You're so lucky being teachers right now because when George and I started being teachers, like we didn't have all the resources at our fingertips like you have now. I mean, you could literally sit in your car, Google the California Standards for the Arts, and walk into your classroom and like have an awesome lesson plan right there.
right.
Um, you know, which is like amazing. So you have a lot of resources. And like I said, YouTube has such great dance resources with videos and also just tutorials. So you are well equipped to go into your classrooms and teach some dance.
Thank you, Alyssa.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.